Zooming debate. The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much, and it's my privilege to join this debate today. I'll actually just start with the question that was raised by the member from British Columbia from the NDP, and would just like to address that at the outset. The whole idea of Parliament and the debates, and sometimes they digress, I agree. I know that members opposite, I've certainly been in the House for some very long digressions. But at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a chamber of debate, of conversation, and what comes out of that can sometimes be quite impressive and actually miraculous. From having the ideas of different parties, of different perspectives, of different backgrounds of individuals, all coming together in this wonderful place we call Parliament, and from that you sometimes get to the most amazing conclusions, and it is, as Winston Churchill said, the best worst system, but it is certainly our system, and it's the one we've chosen. And so I will never apologize for debating an issue, and sometimes I don't like what I hear, but that's okay. That's okay. Even when I'm being heckled, sometimes I don't enjoy what I'm hearing, but that's okay. That's all right. And I'm proud to be in a country where you have the freedom of speech and where the people have representatives here in Ottawa to defend their interests. So. Mr. Speaker, let's go back in time, and because I think it's important that we put context around this debate today, because we've had 9 years. This is not, as much as this government sometimes likes to create the impression that they just walked into town and all these problems had existed and they're here to save it. Every new parliament is a complete ignoring of all the previous issues, and those were some other guys, probably those were Stephen Harper, so they did this, they did that. Even 9 years later, we still don't see an acknowledgement. I don't think I've heard once members from the other side said, yeah, we got this wrong. But they certainly have gotten a lot wrong, Mr. Speaker. So let's just see the background that this latest Liberal scandal falls into. So it wasn't long into this government's mandate. We had already seen the fall from Sunny Ways. And one of the initial scandals, I'm not going to cover them all because I only have 20 minutes, Mr. Speaker, and that would take hours and hours and hours and hours to discuss. But I will go over some of them because I think it's important. So not long after, we have the vacation which the Prime Minister took. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars, the Egacon vacation, as it was called, and he claimed it was a friend. However, the Ethics Commissioner disagreed, and that was his first ethics violation. So we're starting there, and so Sunny Ways is looking a little dim at that point, but we continue on. Then we have the scandal. And I would say, I mean, there's many to pick from, but I would say one of the most challenging, most difficult scandals for this government was the SNC Lavalin affair. And so you will hear, and I think this is particularly enlightening in this debate, you will hear the other side say, you know what, these Conservatives, they're going to trample judicial independence. They are going to trample the bureaucracy. And no, we're not. We're just simply asking documents to be handed over to the RCMP in an ongoing investigation. That does not seem like the trampling of anything. But what was a trampling of the independence of the judiciary and as well as the bureaucracy was what was alleged to happen in SNC Lavalin, in which the Prime Minister, if he didn't do it, he came very close to pushing on his Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, of course, who then who had to resign in order to avoid this interference with the independence of the judiciary. Of course, he was looking for a deferred prosecution agreement, or get out of jail free card in layman's terms, for his friends at SNC Lavalin. And so there you had an actual case. You had an actual case of interfering with the independence of the judiciary. This is not that. And so, okay, so we've got yet another scandal on this journey of corruption. And so we'll continue down the Liberals' journey of corruption that went over 9 years that we're hopefully seeing the end of very soon. The next one, which is really not that far off of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, you would figure that maybe they would learn. As a small digression here, Mr. Speaker, I have what I think are the best kids in the world, but they still sometimes, as a 10 and 8-year-old, go off the rails there occasionally, and I tell them, you know, mistakes are okay, but repeated mistakes are not. You need to learn from these things in life. And clearly, this government is so intransigent, is so dedicated to corruption that they will keep going. So the next one we go is the We Charity scandal. Now, who can forget this chapter, this notorious chapter in the Liberal government? And so we had, it depends on the number. You can argue 500 billion, a trillion. It depends on the way you sort of look at the numbers. But we had, once again, we had Liberal insiders getting rich at the price of Canadian taxpayers. We had an organization which is now, thanks to reporting in the media and the great work of some of the Conservative members in the Ethics Committee, is troubled at best. Let's put it there. Getting a half a trillion dollars of Canadian hard-earned taxpayer dollars for we don't know what. Maybe to build another well in Africa, or just rename it again and again and again. This is the organization that this government sought to give billions of dollars to. And then we have the other Randy affair. Now this is a more recent one. I've skipped over a bunch. Like I've skipped over clam scam, a number of other scams. I could go on, but I want to get us closer to the present here. So we have the other Randy affair, which we have. This is unbelievable to me. I cannot. I'm just shocked that this has not matriculated into an RCMP investigation, or if it has, I'm not aware of it. But that we have a sitting member of cabinet directing his business in a cabinet meeting. This is unbelievable. Literally millions of dollars flowing out the door to Liberal insiders. And then we have one of my personal favorites, Arrive scam. If we look at Arrive scam, and we had a piece of software that maybe there were IT guys who came out and said, we could probably do this for $250,000. But let's be generous. Let's be generous. Let's say, it would have taken $1 million, $2 million. No, this cost the government $60 million, and we don't even know if that's the full extent. The Auditor General actually said their bookkeeping was so bad, it was so terrible, I can't even say for sure the amount of resources that were dedicated to this disaster there. And now let's come up to the SDTC. And so the SDTC is incredibly problematic. And so we have this board, just so if anyone isn't following along at home, which I'm sure they are, we have this board that's there to give out millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars, funded, I believe, in the most recent funding agreement with $1 billion, to give out $1 billion to help the environment, to fight climate change, and to modernize our economy. And so I think, too, it's important to put a little bit of context around that as well. Our economy, Mr. Speaker, is in dire straits. Our GDP per capita has not grown over the last 10 years. There are a number of different issues. Most of them funnel back to this Liberal government as to why we are on such a terrible trajectory to have our growth the worst in the OECD going forward. But there's a lack of capital that the government has smothered with overtaxation, over-regulation. But one of the things that a lot of folks will point to is Canada's troubling record on innovation. We produce some of the greatest ideas in the world. And I say ideas for a reason, not intellectual property, because oftentimes before it makes that jump from someone's idea, from someone waking up in the middle of the night and saying, "Eureka, I've got it," from drawing it on a napkin into a commercial idea, it's already left the country. And so the idea of this organization, of the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, is not in itself a bad one. It was the execution, and it can have it could have had great utility if that capital had been directed to some of the great minds that are currently in Canada, that our wonderful universities produce, that our companies and our businesses. It could have had a real lift for the economy. It could have solved one of our productivity issues, in fact, one of our main productivity issues, which is the lack of innovation in our economy. But instead, it was funneled outside of our economy. So but what happened? So for those of you who aren't aware, there's a lot of sort of specific information, but if we want to really boil this down here, we had the SDTC, their board, their primary job was to allocate capital. So that's a fancy term too. So their job was to take the $1 billion they were getting from the federal government and give it to individuals who would grow our economy by promoting innovation, by providing that capital that businesses need to start. And oftentimes, especially with tech companies, they can be very capital intensive, and it can be years until you get a product. And so by having that funding operation there, it could have added real value. But instead, let's just go over what the Auditor General found. There were numerous, up to $390 million of money that was misspent. And that money misspent, I think it's important actually to categorize that, because there are different varieties of this that are there. So one is that there was ineligible. So you can imagine you are given a rule book to say, like I said, the government gives this $1 billion to SDTC, and they have a rule book of which they have to give that money. That makes sense, Mr. Speaker. And so what did they do with that? They ignored that. And just in the sample that the Auditor General took in her report, there were 10 separate enterprises that did not fit the criteria eligibility, but still got nearly $60 million worth of projects. That $60 million, where they said, the board member said, you know what, we know what we're supposed to do. We have it in writing right here in front of us, but we're not going to give that $60 million to those businesses that fit the criteria. Instead, we're going to pick these other businesses. And I don't think the Auditor General said as to why, but perhaps we can draw our own conclusions there. Then we have other cases where a conflict of interest means that you're conflicted, meaning that you have an interest in a decision that's making. So a director may have ownership. They might have a spouse who's got an ownership in this. This is a normal thing. And in tens of millions of dollars went outside the door, and where they fit in with the conflict of interest. So they said where someone declared a conflict of interest, and they went through the criteria, and they awarded it anyways. And then there were also tens of millions of dollars that they just simply didn't follow or abide by their conflict of interest rules. And so when we get to that, we get hundreds of millions of dollars which are leaving taxpayers' hands to go to, in some cases, liberal insiders. And so this is extremely troubling. Now, when we go back and we go, okay, so we've got the scandal now that's going on. This has taken years, by the way, to make its way through, thanks to the great work of our Conservative members on the Ethics Committee. What will be the impact on that and where we are right now? Well, the RCMP has come out and said that there is an ongoing investigation. And so the Conservative Party, along with supported by other opposition parties, brought a motion to bring forward documents. And unfortunately, what we got from the government was not a complete set of documents. What we got were piecemeal, redacted documents that did not meet Parliament's criteria. So, as I said in my question, and my other colleagues earlier's great speech, that is troubling not just on the substance of this particular issue, but also on a broader impact as well, because Parliament is in itself not special. I am not special. The other 337 members are not special. What is special is the people that we support, that we represent. And so each one of us represent 100,000 people combined, the over 37 million Canadians. And so it was their money that was taken. And so at the end of the day, when we look at, there's over $1 billion, that's $1 billion taken out of the pockets of Canadians. And so when we look at that, that's Canadians handing over hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. And that's money that could have gone to helping feeding their family. That's money that could have gone to a down payment of a mortgage. That could have gone to helping an individual meet their rent. There are so many causes, there's so many good causes that could have gone. Instead, the government, as is their rightful authority, took this money, but there is a real importance to, when government takes that money, to accounting for it to the rightful owners, which is the Canadian people. The rightful owners of those dollars were not generated in Ottawa. They were taken from towns like Colborne, Ontario. They were taken from places like Skeena Balcony. They were taken from places like Toronto and Montreal, and all brought here to Ottawa. And sometimes that money can be spent very well, like support for our women and men in the armed forces that this government has woefully neglected. But when we take that, when this Liberal government takes $1 billion and awards it to its friends, you're hurting the economy, you're hurting Canadian people, you're hurting the most vulnerable in our community. And last but certainly not least, you are undermining the authority and the legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Because when people go out and they see scandal after scandal after scandal, at the same point when they are paying more money to Ottawa than at any point in the history of our country, Canadians are wondering increasingly, what am I getting for these dollars? What am I getting? I know how hard it is to earn. I know that with this Liberal government's record cost of living crisis, record increases in interest rates and inflation, that I'm having a harder and harder time. But then to see insult to injury that this government, which is taking more money than ever before in Canadian history, and just burning it on fire, in addition to taking all that money, also running up the credit card. So not only will our families all have to pay this government debt back, it'll be our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren that will have to pay this debt back. And what will they have to show for it other than a few Liberal insiders got rich? And so that's why, Mr. Speaker, it absolutely makes my blood boil when this government has the audacity to say that Conservatives, by calling for accountability, by calling for this government to not be corrupt, somehow we are trampling the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Come on, man. Come on.